Introducing Wall-Market's most eligible bachelor, the one and only Don Cornell.
When I first played Final Fantasy VII Remake for the PS4, I had to rush through it for review. But despite that, I loved it. The way Midgar was reimagined was exactly what I had hoped for. But Remake turned out to be far more divisive within the community than any of us could have predicted. Even within GVG, there are those of us who love it, and one of us who quite famously does not. After I finished Remake 5 years ago, I didn't play through it again, with the exception of Episode Intermission, the DLC focused on Yuffie. I loved my time with Remake, but I found myself wondering if my opinion would change over the last 5 years. Would a technical showcase from the PS4 still impress on the Switch 2, and would its gameplay still hold up after a half-decade of advancements in the medium? Strictly speaking, the Switch 2 version of Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't a straight port of the PS4 version. This version is based on the Intergrade re-release that came out on PS5 in mid-2021 with enhanced lighting, textures, and a 60 FPS patch. While the Switch 2 version gets both the enhanced lighting and textures, it doesn't get the smoother 60 FPS, running instead at a locked 30. For most games, this would feel like a significant downgrade, but many of us, myself included, played Remake on the PS4, where it ran at the same locked 30 frames per second. Given Remake was designed with this cap in mind, and that the frame rate is consistent with no drops I was able to spot, I didn't feel put off by the fact that this game ran at half the frame rate of the PS5 version, and I can say the same for the only real noticeable visual cutback, Cloud's hair. Without looking at the PS5 and Switch 2 versions side by side, it can be difficult to spot differences in game visuals, particularly in cutscenes. But even in the publicly available demo, it's easy to spot that Cloud's hair, and that of every other character of course, is ripped from the PS4 original rather than the updated visuals on offer on current-gen hardware. When comparing the PS4 original to the Switch 2 version, however, the differences are much more apparent. In fact, you don't even need to look very far. The Final Fantasy community, for a brief period, was obsessed with the door to Cloud's apartment in the Sector 7 slums. It had this weird, flat texture in the original PS4 version that wasn't fixed until the PS5 upgrade came along. On Switch 2, we get the PS5 textures, as evidenced by that same door. Of course, given that the Switch 2 version is running at a lower resolution than PlayStation 5, it does seem softer by comparison. But that doesn't take away from how impressive Final Fantasy VII Remake looks on Nintendo's latest hardware. While playing in docked mode, I was consistently impressed with just how clean the presentation was. Unlike so many Switch 1 ports, I never felt like I was playing a cut-down version of a PlayStation game. Instead, I was marveling at just how Square Enix managed to put such a competent version of such a densely packed world on a handheld. And speaking of which, Remake is even more impressive when you've got it in the palm of your hand. Of course, Switch 2 isn't the first portable version of Remake, but it's so well optimized compared to how it performs on Steam Deck that it's the best way to play portably. While the Steam Deck does allow for 60 frames per second gameplay, the visual cutbacks required to get there are more than I'm willing to put up with. Every moment I spent playing off of my TV reminded me of just how much I love playing games overall on Switch 2. A game like this would have felt impossible on Nintendo's last generation hardware, and here it feels like it's just par for the course. We're in an era in which nothing feels truly out of reach for Switch 2, but realistically, that isn't what matters here. Or at least, it isn't what matters most. What matters most, of course, is the gameplay. Final Fantasy VII Remake has my favorite battle system in series history. The mix between real-time action-based gameplay and turn-based mechanics is something I want more modern RPGs to adapt. It works remarkably well in Remake and Rebirth, and I'm sure it'll continue to be amazing whenever Reunion, or whatever Square Enix decides to title the final entry, drops. In fact, I'd argue even those critical of the Remake trilogy enjoyed the battle system. It's about as close to an objectively good thing as you can get in this medium. Critics were, however, much more vocal about a number of other aspects in Remake at the time of release. People said the world was too padded out, or certain segments of the game took too long, and many were upset that Remake wasn't really a remake, and instead a different take on Final Fantasy VII entirely. But those are the reasons I love this game. Let's be clear though on that last point. The critics are right. Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't strictly a remake. It takes key components and elements from Final Fantasy VII and crafts something new from them. Familiar characters, locations, and events are folded in throughout the experience, but most of what's on offer is new. Cloud himself feels like an entirely different character thanks to him no longer being nearly as stoic as he once was. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Cloud bordered on being a silent protagonist, offering very little by way of dialogue and interaction with the rest of the cast, where this version, while terse in most of his replies, is much more talkative and believable than his original incarnation. In between familiar story beats from the original, Cloud, Barrett, Aerith, and Tifa have experiences that were never part of Square's 90s masterpiece, but are believably woven into existing plot threads. Remake fills out the gaps in the world and brings a version of Midgar to life that previously only existed in the collective subconscious of a generation of gamers. Of all the remakes, remasters, and retellings of games I loved in my youth, Final Fantasy VII Remake is one of the few that finds the fine balance between offering something new while delivering powerful doses of nostalgia. Every time I hear the battle theme kick in or the somewhat disappointingly sparingly used victory fanfare, I still, even now, 5 years later, find myself smiling ear to ear. For every moment that I don't absolutely love in this game, such as Chapter 10 in which you have to navigate a frustratingly complex sewer system underneath Don Corneo's mansion, which, yes, was in the original but just feels worse in Remake, or quests that require Cloud to squeeze through obvious loading zones just a bit too often, or even minor texture pop-in that is just enough to be a little bit annoying, to say nothing of how much I dislike modern Final Fantasy summon mechanics, there are 10 more that fill me with joy. Like the dancing minigame at the Honeybee Inn, or that first time you walk onto the neon-soaked streets of Wall Market, hearing Tifa's theme in the air as you approach 7th Heaven, or that moment early on where they recreate the key art from the original game. Square Enix has managed to do something near impossible. They remade one of the most beloved games of all time, packed it full of nostalgic moments, and surprised returning players, all while making it just as much of a technical showcase for modern hardware as the original was for the PS1 back in 1997. I love this game, and coming back to it after all this time made me realize my feelings about it haven't diminished in the slightest. That's why we're giving Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade on Switch 2 a 9 out of 10. If you've never played it, you absolutely should. And though the Switch 2 version can't claim to be the definitive way to play, if you have Nintendo's latest hardware and haven't played it on another platform, this is sure to be an excellent addition to your collection.
Did you have men in Sector 7 asking about Avalanche? Spill the beans, or...
I'll cut him off.
All right, I'll talk. Some guy with a gun for an arm. I was paid to find him.
Paid by who?
I can't tell you that. They'd hunt me down like a dog.
Well, you better. 'Cause if you don't...
I'll rip 'em off.